everyone, to episode 5 of our look at the Basketball Hall of Fame preliminary nominees. And I'm Kirk Buchner along with Vinny Lospinuso. And both of us are doing this because we thought that the Hoops Hall, as much as we can say a lot of good things about it, one thing they haven't done a great job is really promote how they got to the nominees that they do. So we thought we'd sort of fill in some of the blanks. And we got 4 more names today. One name I think that we'll start off with is the most common one, there's actually 2 names on here that I think a lot of people will know, although I don't know that they necessarily have the best resume out of the 4 that we're going to be talking about today, which makes it that much more fascinating. So Vin, we're going to be looking at a modern candidate or modern nominee from the Lakers. It's showtime. It's Michael Cooper.
That's right, Michael Cooper, the man himself, who don't just think of him as a player. I look at his entire resume,
But
and
remember, this is only as a player.
I'm aware it's.
I know you're aware, but some of the people may not be.
Yes, it's only as a player, though I will talk about his beyond solely playing career because I think adding all together would really help. But if you just look at it as a player alone, it's quite interesting. 5-time champion, part of those Lakers teams, of course. 8-time all-defensive team, defensive player of the year, as well as a first-team All-American back when he was playing for New Mexico back in the day. And at the very end of his career, he played for Virtus Roma, where he was the Italian All-Star Game MVP.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Also, too, 8-time All-Defensive Player, former Defensive Player of the Year. So he's got a very Draymond Green-esque resume when I look at that, as a guy who was not the best player on his team, but was the defensive stalwart that allowed the offensive players to really do their thing.
Mm-hmm.
Fair assessment or fair comparison?
I'd say it's a decent assessment, especially as when you look at Michael Cooper as a player himself. While you had Kareem and Worthy and, of course, Magic, you also had Bob McAdoo and Spencer Haywood there as well. When you thought of the defensive force of that team, and this was throughout their entire dynasty from the 1980s, him, Magic, and Kareem were the only ones that were part of all 5 of them. And he was the defensive, he was the defense that dominated the shooting guard position. And you usually don't see guards of any kind win defensive player of the year, let alone go to 8 all defensive teams as a shooting guard. It's not common.
No, but I guess because of their scheme, that sort of allowed that to work. Because their offense came from other positions, but that was his role. He did it well. I think what also helps his case is just off the court. While he was a player, he is a recipient of the J. Walter Kennedy Citizenship Award.
That's true. He did also win that. Though I don't focus it on as much.
Well, no, but it's still the most well-known, I guess, ethics award you could say is in football with the Walter Payton Man of the Year. This is the basketball equivalent. So I just want to put that in a bit of perspective. That's all.
Yeah, and to be fair, shooting guards did have one defensive player of the year, especially way back in the day with Sidney Moncrief and Jordan, of course. But they've not done that for
a point guard. But still, it's to your point earlier. Guards don't generally win this.
Yeah, and it hasn't happened really for the most part for a really long time. So the fact that Cooper was still like the defensive stalwart on those teams, and he won on that 4th championship team, the one that they won against the Celtics, which of course, the Celtics. That's when he won Defensive Player of the Year. That's when he had his best defensive showing of the entire career in the 1987 team. And now, the one criticism that people are going to have with Michael Cooper's career is not only that he played on a team that had Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, but also because he never was an all-star.
Mm-hmm.
That is true. He never was named as an all-star for his entire career. However, I wouldn't blame him for that. Because we're on a team that has Kareem. When you have Magic, there's going to be someone that going to fall through the cracks in that, and Cooper just happened to be that, as defense historically has not gotten the same attention as offense, which makes sense.
Yeah,
that's true. Always look at those Celtics teams back in the day. I mean, Satch Sanders was someone that didn't get much recognition, but he finally made the Hall of Fame, granted as a contributor for everything else beyond solely just playing, but still. And, Casey Jones, wonderful coach himself, but he was also a quality player on those Celtics teams that won 8 championships. And of course, he's in the Hall of Fame. And, if those guys could be in without an all-star, with Michael Cooper being a very big defensive player, when 8 all defensive teams, like that's I'd probably say that's Hall of Fame worthy, because for a long time, everyone that had 9 or more all defensive teams made the Hall of Fame but the only exception for a while was like Dennis Johnson and Bobby Jones. Dennis Johnson had some question marks with just legal stuff, and Bobby Jones, he was just a huge snub because his entire game was mostly defense. But Cooper would break that through for the 8-team guys, and for all we know, that could help someone like a Draymond, or like maybe Bruce Bowen. Just thinking of names off the top of my head with 8 all-star teams.
Okay, so yeah, it's a good start. This one was a big part of my youth in a lot of ways. Curly Neal. Yeah, played for the Harlem Globetrotters from 63 to 85. And when we look at the Globetrotters, and you being a great historian, the history of the Globetrotters. I think people who are following sports now who are your age, so just, Vinny's in his early 20s, but Vinny knows his history. But if you're just watching basketball currently and you just see the Harlem Globetrotters now, you just see this trick team, which is what they morphed into. They at one point were the best team in basketball, period.
Oh yeah, and the guys on the Globetrotters were just legit stars. You look at their time that they played in the 60s. I remember watching reruns of this on Boomerang. You'd have Scooby-Doo specials where they met up with each other, and they had their own show. The Harlem Globetrotters had their own show.
I watched that show as a kid, then. I watched that show, and like when I was first exploring basketball as, I guess, a preteen or tweener, or whatever you call it, I watched more of the Harlem Globetrotters than anything else, because that was more accessible, actually, because that was back in the days of cable. And on ABC would have their Wide World of Sports. And usually about once a month, it would be a Globetrotters game. Spoiler alert, they beat the Generals.
Yes, they it was more.
You ever see that Simpsons bit? What?
Of course.
You bet all your money on the Washington Generals? I thought they were due.
Yeah,
my favorite.
Yeah, like the Globetrotters themselves were are still an integral part of basketball history.
Yeah.
And you look at all these other guys. They also had another live TV show, The Popcorn Machine, and like they were on Gilligan's Island, The Love Boat.
I covered that.
Yes, you did.
I covered that on a show that's no longer with us. That I used to do with Chris Bourdet. How the hell was this on television? We looked at the Harlem Globetrotters go visit Gilligan's Island.
Listen, if Gilligan is the Washington Generals, I would argue, because he just fails in just realizing that maybe he's the reason why they're all stuck there.
Gilligan got the winning bucket in that game, I'll have you know.
He probably deserved it the least, though.
Well, they threw, if I remember right, they threw him into the net.
That's what he got.
But it's sort of, you know what they had to beat? They had to beat robots.
Yes, I know that the Super Globetrotters, they had another spinoff where they were all like superheroes. I think like Curly had like a basketball head, but okay. Anyway, looking at Curly Neal's case himself, he's one of the most famous players in the history of the Globetrotters. Look at their entire history. The first 5 guys to get the number retired were Will Chamberlain in already, Meadowlark Lemon in already, Marquise Haynes in already, and Goose Tatum. He's in already. So you have the 5 most iconic Globetrotters, and Neal is the only one of those 5 that are not in. He's in the North Carolina Sports Hall of Fame, though.
Mhm.
But it just feels like for someone that is so iconic to the sport of basketball, for that, you have Meadowlark, you have Goose, you have Marcus. You need to have Curly as well. It just feels weird to not have him as in there as well, as he was, I would argue, one of the most famous point guards of all time.
In that period, in that time period in the early 80s, he was probably as recognized, he would have been in the top 10 in recognition in the late 70s,
Oh
early
yeah,
80s. I would say that of any basketball player. Uh,
oh yeah,
an absolute character. Everyone loved him. There were like that was the person I liked watching the most.
oh yeah. Me too. Actually, he was an amazing dribbler. I'm sure there was people that grew up watching the Globetrotters that wanted to become point guards because of him.
I'm sure there were. I think also too, like we sort of I mentioned earlier that when the Globetrotters, like in the 40s, they it was 40s and the 50s. I think they actually had games against the Lakers where
Mhm.
the Minneapolis Lakers, which they won. And then as basketball became far more, which is so weird to say, as they
I mean,
became more
Nancy.
accepting of black people, which is like I remember
Mhm.
learning as a kid, even the age that I am at 51, like what do you mean? What do you mean basketball wasn't integrated? You know?
It just feels weird to say
Oh
it.
my
Like,
god! Yeah,
and you look at the impact that Curly Neal's had on the, just if you look at just the game from a very just basic standpoint, like he would, I would argue he influenced that as well. I think Lieberman once said, Nancy Lieberman said that he was someone that revolutionized the way ball handling was. So like how like Curry does it, or all these other guys.
well,
I
I
mean,
guess. Go ahead. Sorry.
Curly Neal influenced the way that people dribble.
I was gonna say because like somewhere in between, like with the Globetrotters beating the Lakers to where we are now, where bluntly, if you're a Harlem Globetrotter now, that means you're not good enough to play professionally anywhere. In the late 70s, though, you didn't see that explosion of big money. I don't know that the Globetrotters of the late 70s could win an NBA title. Probably not. But Curly Neal could have been on an NBA team for at least 10 years.
Oh yeah, but I would argue personally that him and Meadowlark and these other guys were much more impactful than a championship team probably would be.
I would
If
agree
I'm
with that too. I'm just talking about overall, like against, going up against like who was a champion in '79.
Yeah, like when you look
Portland,
at
Seattle,
those.
those late great teams then. But yeah,
Mhm.
no, I'm just sort of like trying to put it in perspective of if anyone's sort of like watching this and they're saying, well, wait a minute, why are we pushing for a globetrotter? Well, this is why.
Well, not only that, I mean they've had Globetrotters in already.
Sure.
I don't think we're this isn't exactly new ground we're breaking here. And I think it only makes sense to do that because you have people connected to such an iconic part of basketball's history. I don't understand why you can't really have them.
Hey, Curly Neal was in a lot of cartoons. How many of you been in Kevin Durant?
Uh, I know that there's some base. I think there was this Cartoon Network show called Uncle Grandpa or something like that. No, it had nothing to do with incest. In case you're curious, it
Are you
was
talking about Uncle Drew?
no Uncle Grandpa. It was an actual like Cartoon Network show where some baseball players, like
I
I
don't
think
want
you
to
had
know.
like Chris.
I don't want to know. That sounds
No,
awful.
well the show was kind of just weird, but it had nothing to do with incest. Don't worry.
Let's move on to somebody else. I don't.
I'm-
Speaking of incest, here's a Brazilian coach.
what does that have to do with
I don't
incest?
know. Togo Soares, also known as Canela.
Canina.
Nila, sorry about that. Sorry to all our fans in Brazil. Uh, there might be one. There
No,
probably
that no,
is.
the yes, Canela is really, really iconic to the sport of basketball in Brazil. In fact,
Mhm.
we look at the FIBA Hall of Fame
2007.
for their coaches. He was their first ever coach inducted from Brazil into
FIBA?
the FIBA Hall of Fame. And I say the first because the second one was Antonio Barbosa, who's made it in 2022. But you look at Togo, or should I say Canada, he lived a very long time. He was the head coach from 1929 to 1971. I want you guys to be a coach for that long.
1929?
No, 1929 to 1971. He was a
Really?
head coach for like, and it says here, like, he was a coach for like 40, 50 years.
All right. So basically from the days of the well before the shot clock to watching that all grow. Uh, Bronze medalist in the Olympics in 1960. How many
Mhm.
gold? Does he got golden FIBA? Yeah, 59 and 63.
Yes, but also he's won 5 golds for the FIBA South American Championship for 58, 60,
Right.
61, 63, and 71.
And let's all remember, kids, it's not just, well, who do they beat? Well, Argentina's pretty goddamn good. So how about that?
Yeah, they're pretty good, I'd say.
Mhm.
I mean, he was their main coach for CR Flamengo Basket, or Club de Regatas do Flamengo, or Flamengo as most people call it. In case you already know, their colors are not pink, it's red and black. I know, very disappointing for any of those Flamingo fans out there. But they've been a 20-time Rio de Janeiro state champion, which is pretty impressive. And Flamengo has won the most of them, which is the biggest basketball competition in Brazil. And he's won the most of it out of any coach. And because of him, CR Flamengo is still the most respected and the most dominant basketball team in Brazil's history. Like, they are the most well-known team from there, and their most well-known players was Oscar Schmidt,
The
who
Correct me
played
if
at the
I'm
very
wrong.
end.
Was not Oscar Schmidt the first international player when they started this category?
No, there was others beforehand,
Oh,
but
was
he's the
there? Okay.
all-time leading scorer in the history of basketball,
Maybe
though.
that's why I thought that. But okay.
He's a god. Like,
Mhm.
I mean, but LeBron is only, he's like 500 points away from surpassing Oscar Schmidt. In case
In
anyone's curious.
in
Oh,
international play?
period.
Oh,
High
period.
school, collegiate, international, probably pickup games. I don't know. Oscar Schmidt still has LeBron beat. You have all
I
these
didn't know that.
Americans,
That's interesting.
but But don't worry. But we're not talking about Oscar Schmidt. Oscar Schmidt's already in the Hall of Fame, as he
Yeah.
should be.
Yeah, but
We're
I
talking
got to
about,
learn something. I didn't know that.
yeah. But you look at Canela. He was the one that really set the standard of Brazil's basketball program to this day as a wonderful head coach. Did he bring basketball there? No. Don't worry. I'll do a case for that guy later on. I just got to search it. But, for Botafogo and also for Flamengo, he's a wonderful coach. He was also a great soccer and water polo coach, and also a rowing coach as well.
That's strange because usually Brazil's not known for their soccer players.
Ha 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 ha. Very funny there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very funny.
I think there like the case can be summed up in an elevator, which is this guy is a more successful Greg Popovich in a pretty good South American country.
Yeah, especially as how much he dominated Brazil. Like, he was the guy.
A lot
Like,
of groundwork for a lot of good Brazilian players. Him and Schmidt
I
helped
mean,
build that.
yeah. I mean, Schmidt came later on, but if you wouldn't have had Schmidt if not for Canelo,
Mhm. So I guess
and Canola lived a very long life too. 1992, he died at 86, and he was still coaching in like his 70s,
good on
70s,
him.
60s,
Good
long
on him.
time.
All right, so we're going to close off with something from my home country. I've always seen this nominated, but I never did a deep dive on them before. Because honestly, I didn't think they were actually from my country.
No, they
Uh,
were.
well, all right, but I mean, like until recently, basketball in Canada did not necessarily go hand in hand. So when you're talking about the Edmonton Aristocrats, who are nominated in the women's veteran category,
Hmm?
an amateur team from 1915 to
No,
1940.
1912 to 1940.
Oh, okay. 1912. That's why he's the historian. I sent him a message beforehand. Vinny's job is to pretty much run the thing, and my job is not to look stupid. I've already failed 3 times.
It's okay.
I read 412-20 record,
Yeah, that's pretty good.
right? So as
Pretty
basketball
good.
in its infancy, you'd never think that the best amateur women's team would be from Canada. Forget that James Naismith might have invented it. He did all that back work in like in the United States.
Yeah, Springfield, Massachusetts. But in a team in Edmonton, Alberta, forget Toronto, forget Montreal, forget even Vancouver. Edmonton. Edmonton has basketball history right here because John Percy Page moved to Edmonton where he decided to, I'm going to organize basketball team for the school. And, one chose the boys. I said, I'll coach the girls. And he didn't know much about it, but he studied through it very vigorously and had many practices. And what do you know? He established a feeder system, everything else. This guy, I think, deserves to be in the Hall of Fame himself. But as for the team, like they're the first ever, they won the first ever world title for women's basketball ever in history. Not only that, the Edmonton grad team, if I recall, they made the first ever women's basketball hall of fame. Yeah, they did. They made the first ever class.
They were in the
I think
inaugural class?
1989.
Okay.
Yeah, the women's basketball hall of fame. They made it.
If I could, just to put it in more, I guess, national
Oh, no, wait,
perspective.
2010 at 2010 it says.
Like that? Yeah,
Yeah.
I like what you opened up there with. I mean, we're not, how you said, not talking Toronto, because obviously those watching us outside of Canada are certainly aware that Toronto is the biggest city in our country, in Canada. Uh, Montreal being close second. Edmonton was not necessarily in a boom period at that point. I
No.
mean, Canada wasn't even formed until 1867. I can't recall exactly when Alberta even became a province. Like,
Uh,
so
Alberta became a province. Have it right here. Alberta became a province in 1905. So 7 years
7 years
after
after,
they were,
yeah.
so 7 years after Alberta became a province, and you look at the Edmonton grads now.
Mhm.
The reason as to why they disbanded was because of World War II. Um, in fact, James Naismith, do you want to know what he thought about the grads?
What do you think about them?
The greatest basketball team, the finest basketball team that ever stepped out on the floor. His quotes. James Naismith, the
Wow.
guy who literally gave birth to basketball, not literally, well, or literally, just not in that way. He called the Edmonton grads the finest basketball team that ever stepped onto the floor.
Regardless of gender, he didn't genderize that. Well, look at that.
Nope.
That's
Period.
good. Isn't, if that's not good enough right now, I don't know what is to get you into the Hall of Fame. Out of these four, I don't even know who I think has the most impact in my
Um,
personal life. It's Curly Neal, but
uh, there's all these are. I would say, in terms of impact, even though Cooper I think is the most likely, I don't think he's the best of these names. I think he's actually probably the weakest one, which feels surreal to say, but it's true. In terms of just how the game's played and just like impact culturally, you could say Curly Neal. When it comes to, I guess, championship, you could say Cooper. But in terms of impact in a country, you could say Canella. But, you know, honestly, if James Naismith calls you the finest basketball team ever, yeah, you're probably that, especially as you dominate your entire country
Mhm.
and just in general. Like, this changed the way women's basketball is to this day. Hell, there's still like following the success of the Edmonton grads. I mean, you also have John Percy Page and the team itself in Canada's Sports Hall of Fame. But in terms of likeliness, I mean, the women's veterans is difficult, but they're easily my number one. Canella's, it's gonna be tough as it's only one international. Curly Neal, only one contributor or two. He is very deserving, but I think Michael Cooper is the most likely to make it. I think he can make it as soon as this year.
Okay. All right. Well, look for more of these series if you're enjoying that. If you enjoy what Vinny has to say, and he's got a lot of great things to say, check out Vinny Makes the Hall of Fame Case for, where he periodically will come on and make great Hall of Fame cases for people who are not in their respective halls of fame. In some cases, he's actually been able to push some people into other halls. Roy Hoffines comes to mind.
Hmm.
He actually Vinny made a giant push and got him into the Texas Sports Hall of Fame. Leroy Edwards into the Indiana Sports Hall of Fame, and
I've also voted for some people successfully into the Pennsylvania Hall of Fame.
yep,
Um,
because Vinny's a voting member of the Western Pennsylvania Sports Hall of Fame, and some of the distant relatives, because a lot of times, sometimes some of the people you're talking about are no longer with us for quite a long time, but people have found what you've said and have reached out to you and have thanked you for it.
that's sometimes even better because
Yeah,
I will say that for many of these people that I like the most, they're generally not around, but more often than not, a relative will. But I don't know if they're ones to really search out online. But I'm happy to know that I'm someone in their corner because they probably don't see it for many people, let alone someone like myself.
probably not. Probably not. And it's a great thing that you're doing. Check out all the other shows in the Buchnerverse. And with that, wherever you are, wherever you may be, make it a great day because unless Marty McFly and the DeLorean is right, this day's not coming ever again. Toodaloo.